Initially, I will administer the oath of office to our re-elected board members, Lori Goldhoff and Dominic Gavalo. You are welcome to say this simultaneously, please.
Great.
I, Lori
Dominic
Goldhoff,
Gavalo,
do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New York, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of Board of Education member of the Amherst Central School District according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
Thank you. If you would both sign that and then give that back to me. Thank you. And at this time, nominations are open for Board of Education President.
I'm going to nominate Paul Steinley for Board of Education President.
Is there a motion to nominate Paul Steinley as Board of Education President?
I'll make a motion to nominate Paul Sternley as president.
And is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor of Paul Steinley as Board of Education President say aye.
Aye.
All those not in favor? Motion carries 6-0. Is there a president?
Gene, do you want to be vice president?
I would be happy to be vice president.
I'll withdraw my.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we'll need a motion for Jean Ernst to be Vice President of the Board of Education. Dominic? And a second? I'm sorry. You don't want to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, and Mr. Steinley, you'll do the second motion?
I will.
All those in favor of Jean Ernst being Vice President for the Board of Education say aye.
Aye.
All those not in favor? Motion carries 6-0. And I will then need to administer the President and Vice President their oaths. That's for you. And you can say those simultaneously as well.
I, Paul Steinley, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New York, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of Board of Education
Vice President.
President of the Amherst Central School District according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
And if you could both sign those and return those to me. And the remainder of this meeting and our regular meeting will then be turned over to the board president.
I'm good where I am for now, thanks.
Maybe such a short tenure.
What's that?
Such a short tenure you
Yes.
did.
Okay. Mr. Steinley,
We need to do the oath of office for the appointment of officers.
prior to that, we need a motion to approve items D1 through 4.
Okay. And I have a motion then to approve the items D1 through 4.
I'll make that motion to approve items D1 through 4 appointment of officers.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 6-0.
I, Deborah Fitzgerald, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New York, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of District Clerk and Board Secretary of the Amherst Central School District according to the best of my ability, so help me God. And then we need to sign, and the President has to sign.
item E, the oath of office, has already been administrated by was given by the district clerk to the treasurer, deputy treasurer, and internal claims auditor. Therefore, I will need a motion to approve the rest of the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve items F, 1 through 5, G, 1 through 16, H, 1 through 18, I, 1 through 9, and J, 1 through 10.
Is there a second? All those in favor of approving items F, 1 through 5, G, 1 through 16, H, 1 through 18, I, 1 through 9, and J, 1 through 10, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. And now we will proceed to the regular portion of our meeting. You ready, Deb? Can we stand for the pledge?
Pass it over to you.
You can keep it. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this point, do we have, is there a sign-in sheet?
Sorry.
That's okay. No visitors wishing to speak? I don't believe we've had any special committees, or have we? We had a capital committee meeting, but that'll be outlined in the presentation, the superintendent's report. Guess that goes to you.
Okay, so the superintendent's report, we have some good presentations. The first one is Ann Ward. I saw her over there. Mrs. Ward is going to give us an update on her experience as a Fulbright scholar and possibly talk about some next steps of where we go from here, and hopefully maybe an ongoing relationship and an exchange program. So without stealing too much of your thunder, Ann, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would be remiss if I didn't begin the presentation with a thank you to those of you seated here, to Mr. Pennell and certainly to Dr. Chavy for supporting this project from its inception. I'm going to talk a bit about what the project is, but I began pursuing a Fulbright in the fall of 2014 when it was just kind of an interesting idea, and I wondered if it was something I should do. And since I even broached the idea, everyone at Amherst has been amazingly supportive, just very positive. Dr. Chavy tried to talk me into going to India, and the Netherlands was a wonderful choice for me. I can tell you this. And so from the get-go, from Mr. Pidgeot at the high school, who supported, maybe was very happy to get rid of me for 6 months. We can look at it that way as well. But from the start, he was just my biggest cheerleader on this project, and then my department chair, Paul Spielberger, as well. Folks who really saw the value in working toward globalizing education. And I think in some ways that is the result of this project. To make things perhaps go a bit better, I have some Dutch treats for you as I continue to talk. So I'll start them over here. And I warn you, they're not all good, so just kind of go with me on this. The Dutch are very fond of very strong licorice, and so I brought you two kinds. The farm licorice is a salty, hard licorice. It's very sharp taste. And the kitten licorice, Caches licorice, is more of a sweetie licorice, and so, do your best. Stroop waffles were a staple from start to finish there, and they are very small. These are the small kind, but they're little waffles with a beautiful kind of caramel innard, and they're truly best savored over a cup of coffee. So you rested them on a cup of coffee and let the caramel kind of soften before it. But these are I didn't bring any coffee. And very strong Wilhelmina mints, named after Queen Wilhelmina, who is the grandmother of the current king. And so Wilhelmina mints were everywhere, and they were often in pretty little dishes. So for example, the reference librarian at the university where I studied had them in kind of a pretty dish for everyone to take. So these are very, like I say, very traditional Dutch, so try them if you will. Dr. Carousel will pass to the audience. I've got So I'm giving you a version of the presentation that I gave to the folks at the U.S. Embassy in the Netherlands and at the Ministry of Education. Because part of what's interesting about the Fulbright is it's a joint endeavor, that I mean, you on this one. It's a joint endeavor with the Department of State, and as such is partnered with, yep, which one? Sorry. No, where is it the second? Which one? Yeah. I do have them on.
Broke it.
Sorry.
Broke it.
I could also stand here and do this, so that works just as well.
What a battery.
How about that? So I changed this and sent a note to Mr. Pinella as I changed it and said, I realized as a history teacher, this is probably something I should begin with, the history of the program that I did. I'm fortunate enough to teach most of the government classes at the high school, and I teach a section of AP US history as well. And as a result, I end up with a lot of good conversations about citizenship, and so that was where I chose to focus my project. And the Fulbright is an organization that began in 1945 under the guidance of Senator Fulbright, who took the proceeds of selling war products, as he called them, after the end of World War II and plowed the money into education. And he believed in sending teachers around the world to teach teachers about other places. And his big point, and it continues on through the program, is that we have a lot to learn from each other. And so by sending Americans abroad and by bringing foreign teachers to America in similar programs, that we should be able to develop an exchange of ideas. And certainly in 1945, there was a lot to do with the Cold War, obviously. The countries where the Fulbrighters go have changed over the years, as you might expect. It's very politicized in that regard, but it's still some of these things. Thank you. Is it the right one?
Right
Yes,
side.
it's the right click. Thank you. And so this is just learned from the website. But as I mentioned, it's connected to the U.S. Department of State, and as a result, the Fulbright teachers met with our ambassador in the Netherlands, Timothy Broas, one of the first weeks we were there. And this is a combination of Dutch teachers who came to the U.S. They came to a school near Boston in the fall, and then the three of us. So my colleagues Lynn from California, Ellie also from California, and then me there with the ambassador as residents. And then we were fortunate enough to meet the Dutch Minister of Education, a woman named Jet Bussemacher, who said she was thrilled to have Americans because we believe in rigor. And we all thought, oh. And she said, she's worried that the Dutch are very complacent, that they're very happy with being middle of the road. And she said she wanted to hear the American perspective on how to elevate. And all three of us looked at each other and thought, oh, do we say, I mean, you know, what an interesting challenge to come back and criticize the people we watch for 6 months, right? So that was an interesting thing that I kept in the back of my mind. And the Dutch have a saying that I can't do in Dutch. Essentially, the person who sticks his head up gets it knocked off. And so there's very much a normalizing in education. It all kind of comes to the middle, which I found to be a really interesting approach, I guess I would say. And I'll talk maybe a bit about that as I continue. And again, this is the embassy in The Hague where we were hosted. And so I was in the Netherlands, and so this just felt like I should do this for all of us. So, which is this small country here in the European Union. And so this is a close-up of it. I was in the province of Gelderland, between these two towns of Arnhem and Nijmegen. And I was placed there, frankly, because it was out of the Randstad. So this is the busy part of the Netherlands that most of you might know, with Amsterdam, The Hague, and Rotterdam all kind of on the seaports. And it's expensive. It's busy, it's expensive, and it's very, very, Americanized isn't the right word, but maybe a bit more familiar. And the Fulbright seeks to drop its teachers into places that aren't like that. So they want us to feel, as I did, challenged by language, by figuring out a bus system, by meeting people who had never been out of perhaps the province, or conversely meeting people who've been all over the world and who said to me, why is America so great? You know, what's so good about this? So it was really, it was an interesting choice. My two colleagues who came with me were up in the province of Groningen, way far up in the north. And so they had a very different experience up in Friesland with the Frisian language and culture. So my husband and two sons were able to join me on this adventure. I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. And this is on the banks of the River Wal, which is supposed to be the most interesting point in the entire Netherlands. My children were like, okay, there's nothing here. There was nothing there. But it was the site of the first Roman outpost or settlement, which led then to the development of the Netherlands. My kids were not that excited about that. It was really cold and windy and rainy for most of it, so we honestly looked like this for a large, this is us on the North Sea, up in, off the flower fields. This is actually late April, by the way. We had just been to a tulip festival. It was cold. But the flowers were beautiful. My children played baseball while we were there. They played honkball, and my son's there. And my husband coached, and it was fascinating to hear him try to explain baseball in a language he didn't speak to kids who were actually more fluent in English than we were in Dutch. And so it was interesting. They did not have the hit by pitch rule, which we discovered early, so pitchers could continue to hit kids just as long as the kid would stand there. So definite cultural differences. So yeah, we tried to work on these things. And so while I was there, I was fortunate enough to see very iconic things, as you can imagine. This is the Rijksmuseum with the I Am Amsterdam sign that travels around the city with tulips in front, and the bridges, the canals, kind of the things you picture, perhaps. Tulips, of course tulips all over, windmills. And the Dutch are very proud of their water technology. And I sat through so many classes on geography and moving water. And the Dutch will tell you they're the ones who bailed the Americans out after Katrina. The Dutch firms came in and figured out what was wrong with New Orleans and rebuilt levees and dikes. And they're apparently working now with the Chinese on the river displacement projects, that they're moving the Yangtze, I believe it is. Should have my global colleagues here, I can't remember what they're moving. But they're also proud of the ability to make water behave, as they say. And then clogs, or klumpen, as they're called, all over the place, right? Bikes. This is actually an incredibly small town, and the railway station at this very small town. Bikes all over the place. It was a really wonderful culture to be able to bike everywhere. And people took dogs with them on their bikes. It was wonderful. Always a kind of a surprise in whatever was on the bike. But beyond all the culture, I was there to do a job. And so this was the central question of my fellowship. Why do the Dutch vote more than we do? Why do they seem to be better citizens? Right, which always causes an interesting conversation, than Americans are. And how do Dutch teachers make their students better citizens? How do they keep them as lifelong voters? So I looked at some data. This is just a short one. So the Netherlands is here. So as you can see, they have strong national voting turnouts and much less so in EU elections, which is a pattern you see typically throughout the EU countries. And they're ranked third for countries that don't have mandatory voting, which is kind of interesting. They're behind Malta, which does a totally bizarre preference ballot that people in Malta love, and the rest of the world's like, how does this work with runoffs? So you preference your candidates, then you go through another series of elections to make sure you really want them, and then you go through one more. Again, Maltese love it, not so much. But the Netherlands maintains a pretty strong voting rate as compared to the US voting rate. Typically, the US does not distinguish itself in national elections. As you can see, 2012 was a 54% turnout, which was heralded as one of the better turnouts, quite honestly. Typically in second-term presidential elections, turnout tends to be depressed. As you can see, midterms, 37. I mean, I think Erie County's voting rate in the last midterm election was below 30%, if I'm not mistaken. So Americans have a voting problem, right? So I started to figure out what the Dutch do better. And this is where the project kind of took a hop, because I didn't find what I was looking for. And it was late January, and I was there to do a job, to do this research project. And there wasn't really a project to be had, because they don't have a citizenship class. They don't teach it. And you'd think that might have been something somebody mentioned to me before I got there, right? And the guy at the Fulbright Center laughed, and he said, I was waiting for you to figure this out. And I thought, well, you haven't told me, right? And so I thought, okay, now what? And what I found was such a better project than the one I went in for. I wanted to look at citizenship classes and say, oh, that's a great lesson. I'm going to steal it. That's a great project. I'm going to do that. And there wasn't that class. And then I started to think, well, what now? And what I started to realize is the Dutch are invested in citizenship in ways that I wish we could be, and in ways that I am renewed to try now in my own small corner of the world, starting in September. They believe strongly that they have to hang together. They're a small country. They have to make decisions collectively, and everybody has to have a voice in these decisions. And they've imbued that belief in their students and kids at a young age, and those kids hold firmly to that as they go on. So students believe, young people believe, that their voices matter. Because they believe that, they take part in local government groups and actions that we don't have here. And those participatory roles then keep them as lifelong voters. So I'll show you a couple of those. This is how I did it. I visited schools. I took classes at a university, and I talked to people. Talked to a lot of people. Fortunately, the Dutch are beautifully fluent in English, and typically 2 or 3 other languages. So I was always the one saying, thank you so much for speaking English. And oh, they said, nobody speaks Dutch. Why would you learn it? Which I kind of embraced and thought, good point. And so I spoke with public citizenship educators at places like the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, and an organization called ProDemos in The Hague, which work to get Dutch school kids thinking about what it means to be a citizen. And they're on the same page. Anne Frank talks about universality. So Anne was a young Jewish girl. So how does she relate to refugees in Rotterdam? They have a wonderful program. They argue she could have been a refugee. She could have been, you know, the kid in the car next to you. She could be the old lady on the street. Her story is only important in the sense of what she represents. And so the Anne Frank House is doing a lot of good outreach right now, especially in these refugee communities, saying, follow this example. We saw what happened, right? This is what we need to do better. And ProDemos is going down that road as well. I spoke to a lot of folks in the referendum. The Netherlands narrowly turned down a referendum on the introduction of the Ukraine into the EU. It's a very controversial election. It was fascinating to talk to people. I did surveys, and I went to meetings of something called the Jongerenraad Renkum, which is a youth council that's attached to the local government. And this is where I found the project. So I took my family to some of these things. This is a school open house, and I met with a student and a fellow teacher. Bless you. And this is me presenting to the youth council I just mentioned to you in Renkum. And the youth council works with the town government, and the students are given a voice in the government. They're given a budget of 20,000 euros a year to spend on youth-related activities. And their votes are binding, so if they decide to do a concert, the concert happens, or as much as they can make it happen. They held a chess tournament for refugees while I was there, and they voted that to spend money on this, and they gave prizes, cash prizes, and they also spoke with the parents who brought the kids to the tournament about citizenship practices and how to become Dutch. I thought that was really interesting. I talked to small groups of students, so this is me in a classroom. This was an English class, and we were just practicing their English, which was perfect. Talking about, if I'm not mistaken, peanut butter in this conversation. They were fascinated by American foods. Peanut butter and marshmallows was kind of a big thing. They had heard of it, wanted to know if it was true. And so I found myself using our website quite a bit, and so this is kind of a funny picture, as you can see with our website behind us. So I'd pull up our website and show them pictures of our students in the district, and inevitably a kid said, it really is like High School Musical, because I'd show the sports and the dramas, and I'd say, yeah, it's kind of like High School Musical. Oh, that was wonderful. So that was a really neat resource and a good way to stay connected. I chaperoned a field trip to Amsterdam, and so this is my colleague Michael, with our students outside FOAM, the photo museum in Amsterdam. And the STEM Bureau is a polling place, and so I went to a number of them for the referendum elections. But what I realized, and I can do this somewhat quickly for you more so, is that they teach citizenship constantly. So a class on water is really a class about voting, because a very high percentage of Dutch land is reclaimed land, somewhere between 70% and 80% has at some point been submerged. And they vote on what they're going to flood. they have water boards. And you elect somebody to your water board, and they make a decision about where the dike goes. And if you're on the other side of the dike, you lose. But that's the decision, that they decided that they're flooding this side and not that side, or they're protecting this and not that, and you have a say in that. So if you don't vote, and they flood your farm, your polder, well, that's where it goes. And so all of this interesting conversation about geography is really about a say. And of course, it's very nuanced. You can imagine wealthy areas seldom get flooded, right? You can picture how this kind of ends up. And old families' land seldom gets flooded, so there's certainly influence, but it's a really neat conversation. And so I realized I was seeing things like the welfare state. I saw a great class with presentations on the welfare state, and they were about citizenship. We all pay in. The Dutch estimate they pay about 60% of their annual income into some form of tax or another. And you vote on where that money goes. So you're giving up 60%, but you have a say in where it's spent. And so if you don't know what the welfare state offers, so the teachers argued, how can you cast an informed vote? So it's really neat that things that I would have seen as just, social studies were actually completely citizenship based. And I think that's something I've been chewing on as I've been doing lesson planning for next year as well. Like how much of what I teach is citizenship and other kind of cloaks, I guess. And so I think this is really a neat reflection piece for me. And number two, I thought the way that the Dutch treated their youth was just fascinating. The idea of independence comes so much earlier there. We were the only family that walked our kids to school at the beginning. I mean, first graders take the bus, the city bus, and they get off and they walk into class and, I'm like, I don't even know where that kid is. At noon, everybody gets on a bike and disappears. Except for our children, because we were standing there wondering where they were. And we realized very quickly that that's just not what people do. That you turn the kids. They ride trains by themselves. There's very much a culture of trust and independence. And I think that goes into this idea of citizenship. If you trust a kid to come home by himself, you trust him to have a voice in a local government, and then that kid says, wow, my voice matters. Somebody does think that an 18-year-old's voice counts. I'm going to vote. I'm going to show up to vote. And I think that was a really neat takeaway for me. They also approach voting differently. So this is the train station, the main train station in Arnhem, and it's a polling place. So I spent part of a morning there, and people just ran in and voted and ran out. It's very convenient. None of this idea that you had to go home, so to speak, that you had to go back to a neighborhood or go back to your last residence, as we have here, that if you've moved in a certain period of time, you're kind of backtracking your address to find out where you're voting. So they made it very convenient. And I thought that was a really neat takeaway. And Day 66 is a party, largely young, lots of green-ish initiatives. And they do huge outreach to get young voters. And a number of students I spoke with were members of political parties. This one and a couple others. And I thought, wow, I wonder how many of my students would say that. When I ask my students, kind of, are you a Republican or a Democrat? When we start our political spectrum unit, I get a lot of like, and so for these kids to know party affiliation and to embrace it so early is really, again, kind of an interesting empowerment. And here the sign was celebrating that the Giro d'Italia began in the Netherlands this year, so they're reading them in Italian. And Dutch students have a lot of ways to get involved. These two, Ilse and Nienke, turned out to be lovely interviews. And they were featured in a national education journal for their role on Leringen students, so students as change agents, in something called I'm not going to say this correctly, Medjugorje Shapsharand, which is still not the right way to say it, but essentially a board of education almost, but made up of students throughout the district, so from the number of high schools within the district, who got together and talked about things like dress code, and then took recommendations back to buildings. And so it was a really neat way to look at, again, kind of student involvement. And they were all seniors, only one of them is, I think, staying behind. But it was fascinating to talk to them about why they thought that was important, and then how they saw that as part of their political life. So they were members of political parties. They would go to vote. They took part in the referendum election. And then students did professional development. This was a after-school professional development run by, it's not a great picture, this group of students who gathered with the teachers to talk about issues at the school. And it was fascinating to sit through. And it was just a really neat way to do it. And everybody picked a picture that represented their opinion of the school. And so students picked, I don't know, like a calming brook, like running water, and this one was green. They picked like a forest of tranquility, and teachers, of course, picked like traffic jam, or whatever. It was just so funny. And the students said, "Why do you feel this way?" And the teachers were like, "Well, I'm running from here, and I'm grading this, and why do you feel this way?" And the student said, "Because I'm happy here. This is a great place." And I thought, wouldn't that be fun to do? I mean, wouldn't it be interesting to see how our students see us? Do they think we're running like crazy, or do they think that we're, "Oh, I got this"? It was really a great, it was a really neat afternoon, and they schedule it for once a month. I might be mistaken. It may not be as often as once a month, but it's on a regular schedule where different students go into different faculty groups to give their opinions. And I thought that was a really neat way to do it. And so the Fulbright always says, "Now what?" So you all kindly granted me the time to go do this. They gave me the opportunity, so now what? So I think I'm empowered. I think I've changed in ways that I haven't quite figured out yet because I haven't hit my own classroom again. And I think I've got a lot of good things coming. I would like to get this idea of student involvement moving. I run community service for the high school, and I spend a lot of time arguing with 18-year-olds why it's important that they help people. And it's tough. And I'm wondering about the way I'm approaching that. Maybe that needs to be an empowerment conversation as opposed to a mandatory conversation. What difference could they make in somebody's life at Habitat as opposed to how could they get the 20 hours they have to have? So I feel like I've got a tweak coming on this. I'd love to work with members of the Amherst Town Council to see about getting youth involved. They have the Amherst Yes program, which is a great program for volunteers. And I know that there are advisory boards around. And I don't get a feeling that many of my students are on those. And I'd like to figure out how and why. I think we have great students at Amherst, and I'd love to showcase them a bit more and put them out there. And as Mr. Pennella mentioned, I would love to see about bringing some of these students that I've been speaking with in the Netherlands here. And I'd love to take some of ours there. And I think it would be a great conversation to talk about student leadership, our student council, for example, our BLT team. The students who sit on those, to just go and see what life looks like in a different place. I think that would be really neat. I think there's professional development work to happen. We have wonderful teachers in this district who have earned state honors, who have earned national honors, who have earned local honors. And we really need to push our teachers to do those things. We know we have them. And so, from my experience, I've been so well supported. I would love to broaden that and see if there aren't other teachers that we could get involved as well. So, thank you for your time. How did I do this? Oh, it was on my time, I was going to say. It was on my time, but I would love, like I say, if you have questions or thoughts or suggestions for where to go, I'm more than eager to hear them.
It's their school year compared to ours.
They're still in school. Yeah, they have 2 more weeks. And they have only 2 weeks. They have something like 6 weeks between now and when school begins again, but they take 2 weeks much more frequently. So we were there for a 2-week break in February and for a 2-week break in April. So it's a bit more chunked than ours. But yeah, they're still sweating it out for 2 more weeks. My children were so thrilled that we came home in mid-June and that they missed a whole month of school there. They saw that as a bonus.
So do they, you said something about them sticking together.
Yes.
Early on. So do they consider themselves to be more citizens of the Netherlands or more citizens of the EU?
Definitely the Netherlands. Yeah, definitely the Netherlands. And there's some interesting rumblings happening with the Brexit vote, as you can imagine, and some discussion about that as well. They have always, the Dutch have always been traders, and their argument is they have such bad land in such a small country, they have to go out. And so there's always that idea of getting somewhere. But there's also becoming, and this is a project I didn't do, a much more insularity, especially in the face of incoming refugees. And so they're struggling, this was a great time to do this, because they are struggling with the idea of being Dutch, what that means. Are they Europeans? Are they Dutch? And how long does someone have to live there before he or she can be called Dutch? Will they ever be really Dutch? So yeah, I think there's some identity work to be done for a lot of those, especially smaller European countries to come. Yeah, it'll be a good year to teach this, I can tell you that. With our election, and certainly in the wake of theirs, Brexit.
I like your thought about the empowerment with your students.
I know.
The approach to community service being what they can do for others rather than what I have to do for them.
Yeah, and I think it's just a matter of shifting the lens that, you know, that to see it, to make them see it, to help them see it that way, I think is going to be a big part of this. And yeah, I mean, it might be a bit facile to say that it's going to be that simple. But I think that there have been community opportunities we've seen that our students have absolutely blossomed with, who have coached Challenger Soccer, for example, through TOPS or something like that, where they have become better people. So, yeah, I've got it on my list.
Just curious where you stayed was a big area where the Margaret Garden, the big World War II battle.
Yes.
Are there a lot of monuments there
Yes.
to the 82nd Airborne?
Yes,
And that kind of thing?
and apparently Canadians will never buy a drink in that area. They love Canadians because Canadians liberated Arnhem. There's a wonderful museum there, and quite a bit of the John Frost Bridge, for example, was one of the other big areas, but a really neat, and I always thought this as an American, an amazing commemoration of a battle they lost. And as Americans, we celebrate what we win, right? We put up a monument to a hero or whatever. And the Dutch wanted to remember a grievous loss. They underestimated the British, or well, the British, they claimed the British did the underestimation, but whatever. The Polish were late, and the Germans were better than they thought they were, and they rolled through and just, you know, flattened the town. And I think as Americans, we might have an inclination not to celebrate that, or not to put it all out there. But boy, they put it out there in just excruciating detail that we misread this and we didn't understand that. It was
That was a big deal back in the day.
yeah, and we every September at the date of the battle, there's apparently enormous. Kids are out of school, you know, kind of a big celebration, and apparently Canadians come back, and so Canadians are feted as these wonderful heroes. You know, and every now and then we were tempted to say, "Yeah, we're Canadian. Yeah, of course we're Canadian."
It's interesting though that, you know, they're taking ownership of that. You know, like, well, this is part of being a citizen, owning what we are.
Yeah. And as a history teacher, I found myself standing there thinking, how would I teach this? And would I teach it? Because I don't teach, should I admit this out loud? I don't necessarily teach what we lose. You know, history is taught through the victor's eyes. And so I don't go through every battle that Americans lost. And, oh yeah, and you wonder about that, right? Like, what story am I missing by doing this? Wonderful things to think about.
Well, thank you very
No,
much
thank
for
you.
sharing your
Thank you.
experience, and more importantly, thank you for representing our school community in such a positive light and being such a representative of what lifelong learning is and, you know, continues to be. I really do appreciate that. As you know, we've had some discussion around this table about how we might engage students in our process here as the board, and as the new superintendent, my goal is to work with the high school principal and students to have the student voice heard at this table in an appropriate way. So, Anne, I look forward to collaborating with you further on some ideas that we might be able to take from your experience and bring to this table.
I'd love to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next presentation we have for tonight is a capital update. We have some exciting news to share with you. We have representatives from Young and Wright here with Mrs. Conley to talk about a potential capital project moving forward that will center largely on our high school and improving the facility, but also involve some other areas. So this has been about a year now in the making, where the Capital Construction Committee, well, let me back up. It actually started with the Board of Ed touring the high school at the end of our existing capital project last summer and identifying some areas that might be in need of improvement. The Capital Construction Committee has been working feverishly over the last several months to put together the financials and a scope of a project that we could go out to vote with hopefully this winter. So tonight is the first of many public presentations that we'll have on the scope of this project. And with that, Mrs. Conley, take it away.
Okay. I'd like to introduce Jerry Young and Jim Hickey from Young and Wright. They are architect of record. They've been helping us with the past couple capital projects. They serve on the committee and guide us, along with our construction manager, Turner Construction. We also have Mr. Simley, Mr. Vivolo, who also serve on the committee, along with a former board member, Mr. Sonking, former president as well. And then we have Superintendent Pinella, myself, Director of Facilities, Mr. Townsend. Mr. Weil also served as kind of the historian. He's been through several projects in his time, and I hope I included everybody. I hope I didn't miss anyone that was on the committee. So I'd like to invite Jerry up to help along with the presentation here this evening. We start with the agenda this evening.
There's our agenda.
Cover.
As Melanie said, we did start almost a year ago doing some of the educational programming, but really we met with the Capital Committee starting in March. And when we started with them, we started talking about the building condition survey, which you had to do in 2015, which we presented to you last year also, the building condition survey. And that kind of was the basis to start what work needed to be done. And the last projects focused on the elementary school, the elementary schools, getting work done at those buildings, and we knew that we still had work at the high school and the middle school to do. And then we looked at it, working with the principal at the educational programming. How do we bring some of these older spaces, the 40s and 50s spaces, up to 2020? Go forward, that's about when the project would be getting done. So how do we modernize some of the spaces? And we looked at technology and the art rooms and the kitchen and the cafeteria and computers and culinary arts programs. So that we talked about what educational programming we could do, and then we also looked at site work. So we're going to talk a little bit, and I'm going to go through some of the building condition survey stuff. We're going to talk a little bit about the educational programming. We're going to present the site, and anytime, Dominic, Paul, if you guys want to kick in additional thoughts. But we really began in March talking about the building condition survey. Turner and Jim sat down with Mike, and they went through and they prioritized. It was started, we identified $48 million. If you took it down to $29 million, that was 1 to 3, 5 to 7 in the health, safety, welfare. And then Mike worked with them to bring it down and put his real priorities, and it probably ended up at about $15 million worth of work over the 4 schools that needed to be done. We looked at the programming side of it, those kind of things. So those are our pieces. We're going to talk about an estimated cost. Melanie's going to come back and talk about the financing side of it, because obviously in these times the financing side of it is very important. And we're going to put up a project schedule that's just preliminary. And this is all preliminary. There is nothing, this is just kind of where we are at this point in time. We were meeting just in last month, moving things in, looking at site options, and the track needs to be done, and obviously the turf field. And so those are all part of this project. So going forward, just looking quickly at the building condition survey, at the high school, a major cost is the window replacement. And this is one we have to deal with the state historic preservation people because it's a historic building. And so this will be one, and it is a major cost, but I'll go through these quickly. Unit ventilators, same type of thing we did at the elementary schools, need to be replaced. They're in unsatisfactory condition. Another major item is just sanitary piping replacement. You'll see that. These are just 3 out of many items that we had. In middle school, again, it's windows, it's parking lot. Now the parking lot, this is one that we actually have, we did lots of alternative, lots of different designs. There were all kinds of discussions. We talked about where we put the potential parent drop-off, were there safer ways to deal with the bus drop-off, what are we doing with parents who are parking along the access road, those kind of things. So all that is part of our site solution as we go forward. But HVAC upgrades, and then we thought we were pretty much done at the elementary schools, but as the last phase of those projects, one of the things we did is we removed all of the asbestos off of the piping in the crawl spaces, and that exposed the fact that your water distribution systems in both the elementary schools need to kind of be replaced. It was something that couldn't be seen because the asbestos insulation was on top of it. In the last project, we removed it as a last phase. So that's something that's going to be replaced in both elementary schools. Okay, we're on to the site very quickly. At the high school, working with the athletic director, who was a member of the committee. I don't know if you mentioned it, the athletic director.
Thank you.
The very easy ones were the track, which we knew, the turf field, which we knew. We've also extended a ball stopping net around there that allows lacrosse and track to take place kind of at the same time. So this is something we worked out with the landscape architect. relocating the tennis courts, moving them off your property line, going down to 5, which is what is needed at the high school, and relocating the shot discus throw. Irrigating these 3 fields and removing this baseball field that isn't used by anybody so that you have more play fields. This is all worked out with the athletic director. At the middle school, as I said, we looked at a bus loop up front, we looked at a parent drop-off up front, we looked at probably 6, 7 options. In the end, what we ended up doing was creating a bus drop-off, again along the back, very similar, but also putting in a sidewalk that clearly defines it, and then lanes in, lanes out, redoing the tennis courts, putting sidewalks along the access roads to prevent kids from parking and people crossing and stuff along those lines. So you have a clear sidewalk out and then down to the road. Milling these parking lots and this parking lot and redoing this parking lot, because that's the one that's under the most damage because the buses drive over that, the heaviest load there. Existing fields to stay, and then there's potential of a sidewalk out to this ball field here. So that's some of the site work that could be proposed as part of the middle school. And then we've talked a little bit educational programming, starting in the basement. I mentioned earlier, the cafeteria and kitchen definitely is a space when you took the tour that needs some upgrades, needs to be improved, just as a nicer space. But we're also looking at the art rooms, the technology rooms, and a culinary hospitality space to get you. These renovations are to bring it into the 21st century type spaces. On the first floor, talking about main entry, corridors, also computer labs, and the whole music suite, which does have a 1940s look to it. Might be newer than that, but it might not be. So that's, the whole area would be renovated as part of the programming as on the first floor. The upper levels were mainly the corridors, lockers, floor finishes, ceilings, lighting. All that needs to be done just to brighten up those spaces. Same thing on the upper
So there would be all new lockers, hallways would be rejuvenated. Apparently we don't need as many lockers as we once did, so shrink that down a little bit.
Most school districts are having that. This is kind of just an overall budget summary. I'm only going to talk about the big numbers. Building condition survey, approximately $12 million at the high school, $2.6 million at the middle school, and then Smallwood and Windermere, they're both just the water distribution and tennis courts. If we're going to do the tennis courts at the high school and the middle school, we're going to do the tennis courts at the elementary schools. So that's part of that. Then there's the site work, which amounts to about $3.8 million, and approximately another $9.8 million worth of educational programming. It's approximately a $29.5 million project, and we were pushing up and down many times. It was higher and lower depending on where we were, and that was all the work that was done. You want to talk schedule? I guess schedule, this is based on a vote in approximately December. We begin construction documents for the phase 1, which would be the track and turf, because those have been put off a little bit. So we try to get those that are in there a little early, bid those with construction in the summer of 18. And then the bigger portion of the project would start really with construction, light construction, summer of 19, with the heavy construction in summer of 2000. Summer of 2019 would be the heavy construction. Not sure I said that correctly. It's on the schedule. Preliminary.
Okay.
This is not my slide.
So the total project cost is just over $29.5 million. One thing that the Board of Ed charged the committee to do was to try to fit in a project that would have minimal tax impact on the local share. So what we've done in the past with the $23.8 million project that we're finishing right now was we tried to identify a period in which we would have some debt falling off of our books. And so what we like to do is kind of find a project that's a nice size that will have limited local share impact on the taxpayer. So that's what we were charged to do. Our building aid ratio, a form of state aid that we receive on the capital project for Amherst is 74.7%. So for every dollar in principal and interest we spend, we get nearly 75 cents on every dollar. So part of the reason we're doing the funding, the way you see it here, is to really get it so it is cost neutral to the taxpayer as long as possible and little impact on the taxpayer. So we are dedicating $1.3 million of reserve funds. This is a combination of a capital reserve and a repair reserve that we had set up to mainly address the track and the turf outside. So that is going to be dedicated towards the project. The first 5 years of the project are going to be funded in the form of one-year bands. And you can see we're estimating to get a pretty favorable interest rate on those, 1%. And when we do those initial borrowings, it's important to note that we aren't going to borrow the full $29.5 million at that point in time. We will only borrow what we need for cash flow purposes to get the project going. And then the remaining 13 years will be in the form of a bond at a 2.125% interest is estimated right now. So it's also imperative to note that capital projects are excluded from the tax cap. That's the exclusion that's known as the capital exclusion or debt service exclusion. So it is above and beyond what our limit is, the 2% tax cap as it's referred to. So after the debt is expiring in 2024-25, it will have no local impact in those beginning years. After that point, though, it's estimated to have about a $256,000 impact, or 0.75% on the current levy, 0.17 cents based on the current levy and assessment. So you can see, depending on the assessed value of the property at that point in time, the cost and the daily cost of the project. Now, there's some things that the district could do to try to further minimize that local share. There may be opportunities for us to appropriate more fund balance or reserves towards that local share to further minimize it. This is the worst case scenario under this project. This would be the most impact it would have for this size project.
Yeah, I think the challenge the committee received and Rick from Capital Markets was, trying to make it so that the taxpayers don't feel it, but we're also recognizing that we had a high need to improve our facilities, particularly our high school, which you can see is the focus of the scope. So one of the things we would be looking to discuss throughout the capital project would be the establishment of a debt service reserve that would allow us to plan for 2024 when our the principal and interest payments from this project are on the books.
Right.
So we would look to try to take that 256 and smooth it down to as close as we can to our current debt service payment and allow us to make it as cost neutral to the taxpayers as possible. So the bands really do allow us the opportunity to do that, those one-year bands, and the phasing of the project through Young and Wright, as Jerry outlined, in terms of prioritizing some of the things that are at the end of their useful life or in unsatisfactory condition at this point.
So I mistakenly jumped ahead, and the last slide was questions. You didn't really miss anything.
Can you just remind me how this process works from here?
Yes.
And how the public gets involved and how we roll out the information and...
Right, here we go, question. Yes, what will happen is we will have a series of public information meetings. We'll also have a public hearing on the capital project, and then we will have the public vote, which we are hoping to do late November, early December. And then the voters will vote on the project to authorize it.
So when does that start? when are you thinking the meetings are gonna be?
We will start in the fall, regularly
You're gonna
talking
start in the
about-
fall, telling people about it, and then you're gonna vote on it in November?
Well, we're starting tonight by publicly bringing this to the board, and if the board then wants us to move forward, we'll continue to talk about it in September. I believe October is when we scheduled the public hearing. I think that was on the timeline.
45, yes.
Yeah.
And some board also, first of all, this is the first presentation to the whole board, so you have time to look at it, to look at the details, to ask questions. We could come back to, other board meetings, but when it comes to the public side of it, there'll be a newsletter that'll go out, there will be public presentations. We'll go to each of the schools and make a presentation. So the word will get out as to the project, yes.
I feel like there's a lot of work, obviously, that went into this, but like you said, this is the first presentation I'm
Right.
seeing, and I feel like it's already, okay, here's what we're doing.
No.
So I just want to make sure that there's a process between now and when we approve it, that there's a lot more input than, a committee saying, oh, we're going to spend
Right.
29 million on this.
Yes.
Right,
So
yes.
it is.
And there's a lot
it's
of details and there's a lot of information. And that's why, we started meeting, we had a meeting in March, April, May, June, and each one of those were different, different presentations. So there's a lot of information behind this, and we'd be happy to bring all that to you. Starting with the building condition survey, which was the basis, the educational programming piece was.
Yeah, and I
That's where-
absolutely feel like a lot needs to be done, obviously. We talked about the fact that we toured the schools and, in the high school in particular, and then these things that you uncovered that obviously need to get done. But I just, when I look at things like the flow of the buses and being one of those parents that's sitting out there driving through, I've got opinions about that, and I want somebody to hear them. So
Okay.
I'm sure there are a lot of other people that do too, so I just want to make sure that, it's not maybe vacuum waiting.
Yeah. And it was, as we talked about, middle school, parent drop-off and bus drop-off was a big part of the whole meeting.
So when that discussion was going on, actually, Mr. Griesmer was here giving his opinions on that. There was a landscape architect in the room.
Presenting the options.
Presenting some options based on the space and the constraints. You have to have Kyle, Dr. Ellis in the room, because depending on what you do there, it can hinge upon the fields there and change that, and then that changes what you could do with the fields. Can you fit everything you have on it now? So there was a lot that went into, and there's a lot of people in the room.
Yeah, the landscape architect actually came once or twice and observed arrival and dismissal out there, both in front at the parent drop-off loop and out the back. I think one or two times we had our capital construction committee meetings at ideal times when there was a couple softball games or baseball games going on, so we could see some of the parking issues and safety concerns out there. So it's definitely not anything that's been done in a vacuum. I think the capital construction committee is representative of the board and the school administration and the school community, past and present board members. And we went through several renderings, which, as Jerry indicated, we probably looked at 7 or 8 different options that did everything.
At the middle school. Yeah.
From relocating the buses to the front of the building to,
West side.
to the west side to, relocating the gate.
We moved the tennis courts, 2 options. We were moving all kinds of things.
Yeah.
But just changing a few things, what was interesting is you move the tennis courts from one side to the other, and it can change the way the softball fields, function out there and everything else out there. And then Dr. Elliott would say, hey, I won't be able to get all this fit in and run these things simultaneously. So,
Yeah, green space is a premium around here, which we certainly wanted to preserve. The other thing is, I think from the very beginning, we started with the financials. So what is it that we can afford? And then we went to the building condition survey and we prioritized. And I think what we wanted to do is make sure that we put the lion's share of our money into our highest area of need. So of course at the forefront of our thinking was the high school, and then the turf field coming to the end of its useful life, and the track needing to be resurfaced. So as you may recall, at one point we talked about the end of this current project, and what we did was we spent a few $1,000s on some core sampling throughout as an alternate for this current project, which drastically changed the scope of the project, because
In
we
a
realized
positive way.
in a positive way, because
Yes.
we realized that the condition underneath our turf field and our track and our parking lots was better than we were anticipating. So there was much more money available for educational spaces and for upgrading, and less on paving and parking lots. So we certainly have been through, I think, a lot of discussion, but this is by no means a finished product here. This is really the beginning. But there is in the back of our minds that time frame, with the way these things work with state ed. If our goal is to make progress with our facilities, even if we go out to vote in the beginning of December, we're still looking at 2018 before the work commences, which is a long time. And for some of these items, I think time is of the essence and they're high priorities. So,
I just have one more question. How are the costs trending at this point? Because I know from the beginning of the last project till when the project happened, the costs went up quite a bit.
Yes.
And so has that leveled out at all? Or I know it's hard to predict the 2000 to
It has, it's more of a steady percentage nowadays, but workload in Buffalo is still, contractors are all busy right now, which is good for contractors. But Turner did the estimating, and we also put the contingencies in there and the escalation that Turner was looking for. So I think it's fair to say that Turner was comfortable with our numbers after we got, So yes, it's not just our numbers, it's Turner's reviewing them also. But it's a fair question, because it was the problem the last time.
So you'll let us know when the first hearings are going to be? Is that how it works
Yes,
from
yeah.
here on?
There's one public hearing that'll take place in October. What we're trying to do right now is to confirm with the Board of Elections when the machines will be ready due to the presidential election this year. So that will better define the exact vote date. And then there's certain dates that we need to hit, and we have to do things, as Jerry said, 45 days prior would be the public hearing to whenever the vote is. So there'll definitely be more communication, more information and news to come on the project. This is just the initial information that we wanted to present.
Mrs. Cutler, when would you want the board to formally approve moving forward with this? Or when do we have?
I would say we would have to know by early
Next month, the
September.
month, yeah.
Early
August or September, because you have to do secret. That secret is
Right.
the 45 days. So we have to really nail down the scope to be able to say, this is the effect on the environment. And you will have to do a full secret because of the fact that you're doing parking lots and fields and track. And you're doing a lot of site work, which in theory, even though it already exists, it's by definition an effect on the environment.
And the seeker is the State Environmental Quality Review Act.
I'm sorry, I should have said
Yes.
that.
So it's a requirement that all school districts have to have basically an environmental study on what impact the project may or may not have. And our attorneys assist us with that as well in getting that done.
So our goal here, whether it's August or September, would be to get approval of the general scope. And then I think the question you brought up is about more specific detail of how that may look. There's still a lot of time for input on those things, but the general idea would be, we want to put, X $1 million into the high school for the corridor work, windows, et cetera. And we would like to do some site work, some milling, some paving. That's really what we're looking to say from this board, the approval. And then we'll have plenty of opportunities as we continue to work with the Capital Construction Committee, which has board representation on there, as well as the hearings that would be get more into the details about what actually gets.
And I think when you talk about the middle school, I think that there could be some parent meetings and presentations during the phase as we're designing it. And after it's approved, so that we can get those kind of input and stuff like that. Because there are obviously a lot of parents dropping off, and we do want to make it safer, and safer for both the children and the parents and the buses and everybody. And that's the ultimate goal. So that's kind of where we're going. But it's about establishing a scope and an overall budget in probably the next 2 months. The details we will work on. That's part of the design process as we go forward.
Question I had, Mr. Pennella, the exterior visage of the high school, very sensitive to a lot of people, including myself and Snyder and Everettsville. How are these window replacements? How is it going to look?
That's going to be very sensitive to the state too, because of it being on the historic preservation.
I mean,
so we will have to
We
submit.
cannot rush that. A lot of people are going to have a lot of questions about it.
No, we're going to be working with them, talking about what the windows are going to look like. And right now you have kind of a 1990s window in there, and the question's going to be whether or not they're going to try to make us go back to the original type windows, which were probably more of a wood, heavier frame window. And that's one of the cost questions that we were struggling with, and we will have to work out. But the good news is, not only will we trying to be maintaining that facade, but so will the historic preservation people. So,
Because that's an important issue here, I think, that I don't want to see glossed over. Not just me, everybody doesn't want to see glossed over.
Well, there's definitely checks and balances when it comes to that with SHPO, the State Historical Preservation Society, and they weren't necessarily around when we replaced the windows in the 80s.
No.
So there's actually windows there that probably wouldn't be approved by that organization now if we propose them. And they like Jerry mentioned, they will probably ask us to try to put in, more traditional looking windows, wood, and the question will be whether or not that takes away from something else in the project and creates an undue burden. And they have been reasonable, from what I'm hearing, when there's too much of a cost differential between that. But we certainly want to make sure we maintain the architectural integrity. And I think we've demonstrated that with what we've done to the exterior of the building over the last project. With the brickwork and the roofing and the things that have occurred there. Very good point.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry, I have another
No, go
question. Is there any thought of any partnership with the town of Amherst, paying for any of the tennis court refinishing? Because when I was on the board in the 90s, they participated in the renovation of the smaller tennis courts and helped pay the bill, because residents, let's be frank, use those courts much more than we all do. Was there any discussion about that, or is that complicating too much?
Well, I think the partnership is a good idea to pursue. It's just, our goal is to do it during the capital project so we get the 75% aid back on the cost. If the last time you did them, you didn't have them in a capital project, there might be a higher need to partner because the cost was all, from the taxpayers or from the general fund. One of the things that we'd like to do, I think, in planning for the future is have that repair reserve available, where if we are charging for the use of our facilities, like we are with the tennis courts, the turf field, through building permits, we're putting that money aside when we host sectional events, and we make money using our complex. We'd like to put that money aside so that when the useful life comes up and it needs to be resurfaced or restriped or redone, we have the funds to do it because we've generated them over time. So certainly partnering with the town of Amherst is a good idea, but more importantly, I think the building permit process combined with any revenue we're generating from our facilities should be earmarked towards the replacement and maintenance of it.
No, I agree with that. This is just a question that may come up in your public hearing.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Any other questions about the scope of the project, financials? Very exciting time for the Amherst Central High School. I think one of the things the board previously did was make that commitment when they were doing work to a building during a project or one or two buildings, and really seeing it through. And we're seeing that at Smallwood with what we did with the classrooms and the HVAC and the windows. The vestibules being done now at the end of that project. So the exciting opportunity moving forward is the high school here, as well as some other things in the building condition survey. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Robert.
So we have a discussion item about representation on committees. During the reorg, we addressed two of our committees that are required, the audit committee and the policy committee. But as you know, we have several other committees that are active in the district. So our goal is to make sure that we have all of our committees represented with our board representation. So if we
Thank you, Jerry.
we could talk about the board representation on committees at this point. Mr. Steinley, this one is designated for the board president. So the list that we have is the alternative funding committee. I'm not necessarily sure who serves on that committee at this point. Would you like to continue?
I would.
Okay.
I'd actually like to be on the committee as well. I'll write it down.
Oh, you will, okay. Perfect.
And then the capital committee, Mr. Vivalo's on there, Mr. Steinley is on the capital committee. We have
Mr. Stocking.
Mr. Stocking, whose interest is waning a little bit, but he's reluctantly remaining because he ties together some projects that we've had in the past with where we're going in the future. So, my recommendation for that committee would be that we keep some consistency as we're moving from one project to a potential new one, but certainly it's up to the will of the board.
Has the doctor give you any interest in what
She did, I know, want to stay on the policy committee.
I'll stay on the capital.
I'd like to stay on the capital committee as well. At this point, I think Dave does to see what we've started through, so.
Yeah, and it's been a very active committee, as Jerry indicated, in as early as March. I think we've had 6 or 7 meetings from March up until this point, so that makes sense. The SAVE committee, or the safety committee. Anne Marie, are you on that?
I was on it, I never.
Oh, great. Yeah, certainly there's some things from the state that require updating, and it would be great to have you continue to participate. So Anne Marie on the safety committee. Strategic planning committee. We had reached out last time when we were discussing the strategic plan, and we solicited interest about that committee. Dr. Carosella and Dr. Lane indicated interest in being on the planning council. The first meeting is scheduled for August 29th, and there will be several meetings in the fall and winter leading up to the development of the strategic plan. Mrs. Ernst, I wrote your name here with a question mark because at one point you expressed interest in it, but I didn't get confirmation.
Yeah, I don't want to sign myself up for too many things, but I want to do them all. So
It's not a huge.
it doesn't take a lot of time because I'm going to continue on the technology committee and then alternative funding, and I'm happy to. Yes, I would like to be involved. If for some reason all this becomes too much, we'll just have to work it out later. But yes.
Okay. So we'll have Mrs. Ernst on the strategic planning and the tech committee, and then the transportation committee. And forgive me, I had a sheet that had the existing members on here, so, yeah.
I
So,
would be interested in transportation, and unless you already have people there, right?
Yeah, Mrs. Goldhawk is on it, Mr. Vivolo, Mr. Bott is interested. Right now, we have 2 people on there. I don't know if that's by design or if that's just because of interest.
Interest,
I think certainly 3 would be acceptable in my opinion.
as long as we don't have a quorum,
Right.
we're okay.
So we'll add Mr. Bott to the transportation committee.
Is Mr. Beagle, you're interested in spending time?
And like I mentioned before, we previously discussed the audit committee and the policy committee as were required for the reorg meeting.
I think we need to fix the ballast committee.
That's it for the superintendent's report.
What about the
We do need some,
Erie County School?
I was just going to say, prior to going to new business, we do need to have volunteers for the Erie County Association of School Boards and the NISBA delegates, which is items E and F under new business items.
Who's Dr. Lane?
Yeah, wasn't Dr. Lean?
No, I was the delegate last year. She was the alternative.
Okay.
I'd have to have to be the delegate. He's the delegate as well. So the Erie County School Boards Association delegate and the delegate to the
The voting delegate for NISBA. Were you on the budget and finance team for the Erie County School Board?
I don't follow. Do you want to be on that?
Which committee
The
is that?
legislative. It's Erie County School Board legislative.
The legislative team and all.
Yeah.
Erie County Association.
I don't think, I can't really make it to too many meetings.
When are they?
On Thursdays.
Three a year, for the 3 year, a year?
During the day or?
No, 6. That's it.
Maybe help you on that.
Would you like to co-represent?
Yeah, co-representative.
Yeah.
One doesn't go to 3 meetings as a vote.
We might be able to represent them that way.
Okay. And that
It's
would
only
be,
realistic answer.
that would be for the legislative team?
Yeah, in the legislative, that's what it is.
What do we need, Scott?
The last would be, and not that we necessarily have to fill this, is for the budget and finance team for Erie County Association School Boards.
Did we have somebody last year?
We did not,
Have we had somebody in the past?
not in my tenure here. It's very compelling.
Yeah.
Good enough on our plate here.
Yeah.
These are big numbers.
Are we staying status quo?
Yeah.
Sounds good,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And that would be all then.
That's what we're set?
Yep.
Okay. And I think we need a motion for new business.
You make the motion, no? I move that we accept, that we approve following new business items, section 1A through N, 2A through J, and 3A through J.
I'm sorry, excuse me, it would be, under 3, they are individual items because it doesn't start with A.
Okay. And items 3,
C.
C, I would say C, D, E, I, H, I, J. G, H, I, J.
No, wait,
No H.
No, H. Oh, no, I'm sorry, it's
It's okay. It's an acquired skill.
Do we have a
not.
second?
Reading minutia.
I'll
Emery?
Emery seconded.
All right, all those in favor of new business items F1, A through N, 2A through J, and 3C, D, G, I, and J, please say aye. All those against? Motion carries 6-0. We have any follow-up action items?
This is not necessarily a board item. This is a personal item of confirming with the Board of Elections when we might be able to get the machines. And then Ms. Connolly can report back.
Before we move on still, I just want to say welcome to Mike Belisle in his new position as Director of HR. Welcome aboard. Let's see, I guess we need a motion to convene to executive session.
I'll make a motion to convene to executive session for matters regarding employment of a particular person or corporation.
A second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Motion carries 6-0. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.